Close your eyes and imagine stepping back in time to an era when movie theaters were temples of glamour, and the mere flicker of black and white images on a screen could captivate entire nations. It was a realm of ethereal stars, whose voices and faces wove themselves into the cultural fabric of countries around the world. Into this sphere of enchantment was born a woman destined to transcend her era, a woman who continued shining with undiminished brilliance well into her golden years. Her name was Sara Montiel, but to call her simply an actress or singer might fail to capture the essence of her star power. She stood as a timeless icon, a visionary, and someone whose life story feels like a cinematic masterpiece all by itself. Get ready for a journey that blends the dazzle of old Hollywood with the passionate rhythms of Spanish and Latin American cinema, laced with personal anecdotes, major turning points, and the indefinable spark that only a true legend can wield. Sara Montiel, born María Antonia Abad Fernández on March 10, 1928, in the rural setting of Campo de Criptana, was never meant for ordinary living. Campo de Criptana, in the province of Ciudad Real, sits in that fabled region of Castilla-La Mancha, home of windmills and Don Quixote lore. One can easily imagine a young girl, eyes bright with anticipation, gazing out at the vast Spanish plains and daring to dream of more. She came from humble beginnings. Her father, Isidoro, a peasant who later opened a bar, and her mother, Maria Vicente Fernandez, striving to give their daughter a future beyond the daily toil of farming or tavern keeping. And in many ways, that wide-open horizon shaped the young girl's imagination. Even as a child, she was entranced by storytelling and stagecraft, weaving small fantasies in her mind. Little could anyone guess that this precocious spirit would one day dominate cinema screens from Madrid to Mexico City to Los Angeles. Early on, Sara's natural beauty caught the attention of people around her. Her features were expressive, large, soulful eyes, a silhouette that projected both delicate femininity and unbreakable resolve, and a presence that demanded that you watch her. Spain's film industry, specifically the production giant Cifesa, soon discovered her in her early teens. She won a beauty and talent contest that not only validated her star potential, but literally signed her up for a film contract. In 1944, she made her debut in a modest role in Te Quiero para mí. Though she was credited under a different name, Maria Alejandra, the presence that flickered on the screen was undeniably that of a star in the making. You can almost picture a theater full of patrons leaning forward in their seats, enamored with this newcomer who radiated an arresting charm. By the end of 1944, she had already leapt from bit player to starring roles, culminating in Empezó en Boda, a film that introduced her new name, Sara Montiel, and drastically altered her image. Blonde, sophisticated, worldly, she was recast from the simple Spanish girl next door into a cosmopolitan actress who could hold her own opposite well-established performers. The name Montiel was chosen as a tribute to Campos de Montiel, those famed fields of La Mancha that surrounded her birthplace. As for Sara, it came from her grandmother, an homage that connected her stage persona to her family roots. But there was a nickname that fans, the press, and colleagues quickly adopted, Sarita, meaning Little Sara, a playful nod to both her youth and the affectionate presence she had on set. Over the next 4 years, Sara Montiel appeared in 14 films, one after another, honing her craft, experimenting with different roles, and winning admirers along the way. One key stepping stone was the film Locura de Amor. This production not only widened her exposure, but also demonstrated her ability to sway audiences with an emotional performance. proving she wasn't just another pretty face. Eventually, her work gained enough traction that Mexico began paying attention. The 1950s were a vibrant decade for Mexican cinema, often regarded as a golden age in its own right, where iconic figures like Pedro Infante, Jorge Negrete, and Dolores del Rio reigned. This was an opportune moment for Sara to cross the Atlantic and make her mark. Between 1950 and 1955, she made 13 films in Mexico, establishing herself as one of the most popular film actresses there. Each role tapped into her signature magnetism, an almost hypnotic combination of sincerity, beauty, and the kind of intensity one might associate with an opera singer belting out a heartfelt aria. Audiences in Mexico couldn't get enough. Cinema halls filled up. Talk in cafes and family gatherings inevitably involved praising Sarita's latest film. Meanwhile, her name was becoming recognized in other Latin American countries too, from Argentina to Cuba, as Mexican cinematic exports circulated widely across the continent. Hollywood is always on the lookout for fresh faces with proven box office appeal, and Sara was no exception to that rule. If you were a rising star in Mexico or Europe, there was a fair chance that big American producers would extend an invitation to see if you could replicate that success on their home turf. Hollywood's appetite for exotic or international talent was immense, so it was hardly surprising when a series of offers led Sara Montiel to appear in the 1954 film Vera Cruz, directed by the celebrated Robert Aldrich. That film starred powerhouse names Gary Cooper, the epitome of the strong, silent American hero, and Burt Lancaster, whose confident swagger practically defined the era's leading men. Vera Cruz introduced Sara to American audiences, or at least those who might not have kept up with Mexican or Spanish cinema. This was her stepping stone, a chance to see if she could adapt to the Hollywood system, even for a little while. Following Vera Cruz, she filmed Serenade for Warner Brothers in 1955, co-starring Mario Lanza, Joan Fontaine, and Vincent Price. This was no small affair. The film was directed by Anthony Mann, who would become a defining figure in her personal life. Mann, a respected filmmaker known for his classic westerns and collaborations with James Stewart, apparently recognized something in Sara. Beyond the camera appeal, there was a spark of personality that fascinated him. They got married 2 years later, uniting two worlds, the meticulous craft of a Hollywood director and the luminous artistry of a Spanish-born actress who had become the toast of Mexico. The marriage made headlines in Hollywood and in Spain, fueling tabloids and the public's fascination. While her personal life had become transatlantic news, her film career was taking shape in a more strategic way. However, it was in Mexico where Sara first learned to read and write properly, as per her own recollections. According to accounts, the poet Felipe Leone took her under his wing and taught her literacy skills. This fact alone reveals so much about her unstoppable drive. Despite modest beginnings and limited formal education, she propelled herself forward in a business that demanded versatile talents. Hollywood took note, and studios were eager to get her under a traditional 7-year contract that might transform her into a bankable star. She famously turned down such an offer from Columbia Pictures, wary of how Hollywood tended to typecast Hispanic or Latina actresses. Rather than allowing herself to be pigeonholed, Sara preferred to freelance, taking roles with Warner Brothers and RKO, giving herself more creative and contractual freedom. The major turning point that catapulted her to worldwide megastardom happened not in the United States but back in Spain in 1957. She returned home for what was considered a relatively low-budget musical film, El Último Cuplé. No one anticipated just how much of a phenomenon this film would become. It smashed box office records throughout Spain, surpassing all prior benchmarks. It literally played for over a year in some theaters, a longevity that, in modern terms, would be almost unimaginable. Though Spain was in a very different political climate at the time, with Francisco Franco's authoritarian regime in place, people from all walks of life flocked to see Sara Montiel. Her voice, her on-screen presence, and the dramatic narrative all combined into a cinematic event. Suddenly, Sarita Montiel was more than just a star. She was a national treasure. That success reverberated well beyond Spain's borders. In Latin America, where her name already carried weight, El Último cuplé soared in popularity, making her an even bigger draw. Western European audiences embraced her too, intrigued by her exotic mystique and enthralled by the songs she performed in the film. If you can picture the 1950s theater experience, velvet seats, elaborate movie posters, the hush as lights dim, then you'll appreciate just how staggering it was for a single movie to remain in theaters for months on end. People went back multiple times memorizing the soundtrack, which featured cuplés, a Spanish musical style that accentuated dramatic storytelling. The film's theme song and the entire album sold in staggering numbers. Some sources even claimed that her recordings outsold those of artists like Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra in certain international markets. Though direct statistical comparisons can be tricky, the suggestion alone speaks volumes about her cultural impact. Spurred by that achievement, she filmed another musical, La Violetera, which turned out to be every bit as successful, if not more so. The theme song became her signature piece, a tune that fans would expect in any live concert or radio appearance. The film soared in European markets, in Latin America, and essentially cemented her standing as a top international star. From there, she had her pick of projects. She recorded albums in multiple languages: Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and even a few lines in English. Her live concerts were lavish affairs, featuring glamorous costumes, robust orchestras, and packed venues. Posters from the 1950s and 1960s show her name in enormous letters, often above the titles of her films, an indication of just how integral she was to the marketing draw. Financial success soon followed the critical and popular acclaim. In an era when movie star salaries were nowhere near today's astronomical sums, Sara Montiel was commanding fees that rivaled top Hollywood celebrities. Reports suggest she became the highest-paid actress in the Spanish-speaking world, and even in certain European circles, with rumors that she earned as much as $1 million for a film project, eye-popping for the mid-20th century. This level of wealth and visibility gave her enormous influence. She kept her stage musicals vibrant, performed in top theaters and opera houses around the world, and managed to maintain a steady output of film roles through the 1960s. Each release brought in droves of spectators, and each record album sold in droves. However, by the early 1970s, the Spanish film industry was shifting. The Franco dictatorship was weakening, and censorship had begun to lift. Movies started to edge toward more explicit content, with nudity and erotic themes that had been taboo just a few years prior. Sara Montiel, always protective of her image and the artistry of her performances, found herself at odds with the new direction. She starred in the 1974 film Cinco Almohadas para una noche, 5 pillows for one night. But when she saw how the industry was veering away from the stylized musicals and romantic dramas she loved, she decided to retire from cinema. She publicly expressed her discomfort with the turn toward gratuitous nudity, feeling that her brand of cinematic elegance was being compromised. Retiring from film did not mean stepping out of the spotlight, though. Her love for performing propelled her into television variety shows, stage musicals, and live concerts where she still mesmerized crowds. From 1970 to 1973, she starred in Sara y Punto, an elaborate TV program that showcased her singing skills, comedic flair, and charismatic banter with guests. Other shows included Sara en Persona, Saritissima, Increíble Sara, and Super Sara Show, each running through the 1970s, becoming must-see events in Spain. These shows combined the structure of a variety program with the timeless glamour of a star who could hold an audience rapt just by flashing a smile or adding a sultry trill to a note. In the 1990s, defying expectations of age and career longevity, she jumped back into television with a mini-series that was essentially a serialized biography featuring elaborate recreations of her life's milestones and cameo appearances from other big names in entertainment. It was as if she wanted to share her personal journey with a new generation who might have only heard stories of el último cuplé from their parents or grandparents. While some critics questioned whether this prolonged exposure risked tarnishing her legendary status, arguing that maybe she should have kept a certain mystique Sara Montiel forged on, quite content to stay in the public eye for as long as possible. If her professional life was full of triumphs, her personal life was equally dramatic. She married Anthony Mann in 1957, but the marriage ended in divorce a few years later. Later, she had additional marriages, one that ended in an annulment by the Catholic Church, and another to her longtime manager, José Pepitos. After years of miscarriages and heartbreak in trying to have a family, she adopted 2 children in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Thais, a baby girl from Brazil, and a baby boy named Zeus from Spain. This decision to adopt was revolutionary in a Catholic country like Spain at the time. Sara Montiel devoted much of her time to her children, insisting on giving them stability and warmth, even as she maintained an active performing schedule. She famously traveled with them to concert dates whenever it was feasible, her children dozing in dressing rooms while she dazzled audiences for hours on end. Sadly, tragedy struck in 1992 when Pepitos, the man who had been both her husband and her professional collaborator, died of cancer. By all accounts, his passing was a devastating blow. She grieved openly, revealing a vulnerability that only heightened her connection with fans, who sent an outpouring of letters, flowers, and messages of support. Life, however, marched forward, and so did Sara. She continued to perform, record music, and even had cameo appearances in films or documentaries that paid homage to her career and contributions to Spanish cinema. Her resilience, her ability to keep going in the face of heartbreak, was another trait that made people admire her all the more. On April 8, 2013, at age 85, Sara Montiel passed away unexpectedly in her Madrid penthouse from what was reported as cardiac arrest. Just days earlier, she had celebrated her birthday with an unabashed declaration that she would never consider retiring. She seemed unstoppable, a force of nature, driven by the vitality that had fueled her entire career. But fate, as often happens, had its own timetable. Her death sent shockwaves through Spain and reverberated worldwide. Obituaries cropped up in leading newspapers, tributes poured in from film historians, actors, directors, and fans of all ages, each one testifying to her extraordinary impact. Monuments of flowers gathered outside her home. The Spanish media devoted extensive coverage to her funeral, which was held at the San Justo Cemetery in Madrid, where she was laid to rest. Her legacy was discussed on TV talk shows, radio segments, and online platforms, spanning various languages. It was as though an entire era of Spanish film had come to a close, but not before leaving an indelible mark on global pop culture. As for awards, her trophy cabinet overflowed. She won Spain's equivalent of the Oscars, the Premio del Sindicato, for Best Actress 2 years in a row. An unprecedented feat at the time. She was frequently referred to as Spain's greatest cinematic muse of the 20th century, a label reiterated by critics who wrote breathless praises of her beauty, her voice, and her enduring artistry. She made nearly 50 films and recorded around 500 songs. Younger generations, who might only know her name because their grandparents still listened to her old records, discovered that her music retained a mesmerizing quality, despite shifting contemporary tastes. Songs like La Violetera and the entire soundtrack of El Último cuplé remain timeless reminders of her artistry. Over time, her discography has found its way onto digital streaming services, giving curious new fans a chance to be charmed by that elegant, expressive voice. In her later years, she refused to let critics define her. Whenever they sniped that she was becoming a caricature of her once glorious self, she would point to her continued success, her sold-out shows, and her unwavering fan base as proof that she still mattered. That was the essence of Sara Montiel, a fierce dedication to the idea that age is just a number and that the heart of a performer never truly stops beating. Her dramatic flourishes and flamboyant style inspired generations of artists, from Spanish pop singers to international movie stars, who adored her defiance of cultural norms. She never lost her flair for boldness either. In interviews, she could be blunt, witty, and refreshingly unguarded. She believed in living life fully and channeling her experiences, both joyful and tragic, into her work. To understand just how far her influence reached, consider that in her heyday, major Hollywood stars often admired her from across the Atlantic. People like Marilyn Monroe or Ava Gardner, who spent time in Spain, either saw her performances or heard of her luminous presence. Tales of chance meetings, dinner parties, or backstage introductions swirl through the annals of showbiz lore. Because Sara Montiel was more than a Spanish star. She was an ambassador of a particular brand of Latin flair, mesmerizing with each swirl of a dress hem or each line of dialogue spoken in that smoldering voice. What made her so beloved, even decades after her greatest box office successes, is that she personified passion. On screen, she could portray love, heartbreak, jealousy, and defiance with such authenticity that audiences felt it resonating in their own lives. Off-screen, she was known for her unwavering love of family, her transparent desire to be a mother, and her generosity toward friends and collaborators. She made no apologies for wanting both a spectacular career and a close-knit family life, forging her own path in a conservative society. In many ways, she was ahead of her time, an emblem of female empowerment, an international success story, and a pioneer in bridging cultural divides between Spain, Mexico, and the broader Spanish-speaking world. Her final resting place, the San Justo Cemetery in Madrid, carries within it the echoes of an illustrious life. But the echo lingers on in the work she left behind. Students of cinema study her performances in film school, analyzing how she managed to blend comedic timing, dramatic nuance, and musical expression all in one. Musicians still marvel at the emotional texture of her recorded songs, as she could bring a hush to a concert hall with just a measured breath and a note. Fans who grew up in the golden age of black and white cinema remember her as the star who lit up their youth and gave them respite from the difficulties of post-war Europe. She received multiple tributes from Lifetime Achievement Awards in Spain to honors at various film festivals. She was celebrated as a cultural icon by newspapers and magazines across the Spanish-speaking world. Photographs from her older appearances reveal a woman who, no matter the year, dressed to impress and radiated star quality. Whether in a sequined gown fit for a Hollywood red carpet or a more reserved outfit for a Spanish press event, she exuded the same confidence that first propelled her to stardom as a teen. Even today, there remains a strong curiosity about the intimate details of her life. People explore her relationships, her adopted children, her supposed feuds, and her friendships with other stars. Some of these accounts morph into myths, intensifying her legend. Perhaps she had secret conversations with Hollywood bigwigs about starring in musicals she ultimately turned down, or maybe she was singled out for her beauty by countless suitors. The truth is likely more nuanced. But in the realm of show business, a sprinkling of mystery only enhances a star's allure. Sara Montiel thrived in that realm of the half-known, the hinted at, the whispered about. For modern audiences who want a taste of her magic, it's worth finding old clips of her performances on platforms that archive classic cinema. You might stumble upon her vibrant presence on a TV special from the late 1970s, or watch a digitized version of El Último cuplé. Even after all these decades, the immediacy of her expression remains potent. Perhaps it's in the elongated vowels of her songs, or the way she lingers on a line of dialogue, or that special something in her eyes. A glimmer of pride, a dash of challenge, as if daring viewers to peel back the layers of the performance. That intangible magnetism is what great performers offer the world. And Sara Montiel gave it freely, consistently across continents and across cultural boundaries. As we reflect on her life, it's tempting to wonder how she might fare in today's entertainment industry. The world has changed drastically since her prime. There are streaming services, social media platforms where celebrities interact directly with fans, and endless digital content overshadowing the glitter of old film studios. One can imagine that Sara Montiel, with her fierce independence, might have found new ways to thrive. She might have launched her own YouTube channel or wowed a global audience on a streaming platform with a special concert event. She might have collaborated with younger artists, bridging generational gaps and melding traditional Spanish music with modern pop or EDM beats. Her exuberance, sense of style, and unwavering desire to connect with fans almost ensure she would have found a niche. But rather than dwell on hypothetical scenarios, it's perhaps best to celebrate what truly happened. An impoverished girl from La Mancha transformed herself into one of the biggest international stars Spain has ever produced. She ventured into Mexico's golden age of cinema, learned to read from a poet, refused to be pigeonholed by Hollywood, commanded million-dollar salaries, recorded hundreds of songs, and left the world with an unparalleled cinematic legacy. She mothered 2 children and insisted on being a present, loving parent. She faced heartbreak, but never let it diminish her joie de vivre. And above all, she kept performing right up to the final chapter, telling the world she had no intention of retiring, only to depart unexpectedly, reminding us that life in its final act writes its own script. Today, her story resonates because it embodies themes that never grow old: resilience, ambition, passion, and authenticity. Whether you're a fan of classic Spanish musicals, fascinated by the golden era of Mexican cinema, or simply enthralled by the glitz and drama of old Hollywood, Sara Montiel's story holds universal appeal. Hers was a life lived in full color, even during a time when many films were still in black and white. She taught us that true star power transcends language, borders, and even decades. Sara Montiel's legacy endures in the hearts and minds of those who cherish classic entertainment history. She belongs to that rare pantheon of film legends who can't be duplicated. Her artistry emerged from a specific cultural moment, fueled by the synergy between post-war Spain's hunger for cinematic escapism, the vibrant energy of Mexican film, and the global pull of Hollywood. Her memory is preserved by film archives, in museum exhibits dedicated to Spanish cinema, in vintage record stores where collectors still rummage for her albums, and in the personal recollections of fans who recall seeing her live in concert. Thank you for joining this journey through the life and times of Sara Montiel. From her unstoppable rise to fame, to her candid refusal to be boxed in by Hollywood executives, from her devotion to her children to her heartbreak over lost loves, she leaves behind a portrait of a woman who thrived on passion and artistry. If you find these stories intriguing, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the legends of film and music, and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next exploration into the luminaries who shaped our shared cultural imagination. For now, let's honor Sara Montiel's legacy by revisiting her films, replaying her tracks, and remembering that sometimes a determined spirit can carve out a legacy so profound that time itself can't erase it.